Everybody seeing that?
Yep,
Thumbs
just
up.
popped up.
Okay. Well, I was a grad student about the same time as Eric was back in the 70s and 80s in Minnesota. We overlapped about 4 or 5 years, him at the end of his career, me at the beginning of my career. And yeah, we shared a house together. So that's how we really got to know each other, and of course the professional life after that. And I acknowledge a lot of friends on helping me with this this PowerPoint. You've seen a lot of the photos already cycling through, so we'll add some context to those now. Well, and I want to go over how Eric fit into the researchers at Minnesota, some of the fun field work we had in the lab, and then a little bit about his impact and friendship in general. So in Minnesota, the first person, of course, long ago was Newton Horace Winchell, who was the first geologist in Minnesota. But I mentioned him because, as George pointed out, there was an expedition to the Black Hills in 1874, and Winchell was the geologist on that. And he made the first map of the Black Hills. Good thing he didn't go 2 years later, because 1876 was when Custer was wiped out by the Sioux and the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. But Winchell was also interested in Native Americans, as was Eric. They had, therefore, those things in common. There's a bit of an unconformity here before William Skinner Cooper shows up in Minnesota, a great geobotanist who studied a lot of succession in Isle Royal and Glacier Bay. And with him, shortly thereafter, was Don Lawrence, an influential plant ecologist who carried on a lot of the work at Glacier Bay and really fleshed it out. Then after another unconformity here, Herb Wright shows up at Minnesota in the late 40s and throughout the 50s, and he set up the pollen lab and got things going. Of course, one of the grand old men of paleoecology, linking climate, landscape, vegetation change, all those things are put together. Herb and Don knew each other. I'm not so sure Cooper and Herb actually knew each other, even though they overlapped a few years. Well, I think of Herb as having 4 very influential early students in his career that really set the stage for a lot of the rest of us. Now, there were many students that Herb had, but I think of these 4 as being pivotal and foundational. It's Bob Bright, Lou Maher, Jock McAndrews, and Ed Cushing. And of course, Herb could pass along his knowledge in glacial geology to each of these 4 pillars of paleoecology. But Don Lawrence and other botanists passed along a lot of plant ecology and botanical information to these guys. And actually, Don was Jock's principal advisor. Herb was heavily influential, but his direct advisor was Don. And then to learn palynology, Herb brought in Magnus Friis from Sweden. And all these things, these 4 guys were all experts in these fields, really, and they all came to fruition in Eric as well. And I think he fits right in with these 4 pillars of paleoecology. Eric really is yet another one of those. You can't really overstate the influence that Ed Cushing had on Eric as Eric's advisor. And they created tools to help others and to make the science better. Ed had a pollen reference collection that everybody came and used across North America. Ed was an expert in plant ecology and palynology. He was an early studier and workers with the mainframe computers. He had his own pollen database, Pol Data, and his own plotting program, Pol Data or Pol Plot, and this was all done on a big electrostatic plotter and mainframes, and studied multivariate statistics. And of course, Eric took all these things and brought them to fruition with his own work with teleograph, CONUS, and with neotoma. So there really was a very strong connection. They were just 2 peas in a very big in a pod. They were big peas in a pod, I guess you'd say. I don't want to take anything away from all the other people who had a great influence on Eric. Of course, special relations with Bill Watts, John and Hillary Burks, a whole host of other people spread across the world. And of course, in this cloud, like all paleoecologists, we would tend to cluster this cloud better. But there's also more than those clusters. There are people all across the world who have had, at least this day, to explain how Eric has helped them in their career, made their lives in science better. So in the Cushing lab, looking at the vegetation across the state, it really started with Ed in 1963. His thesis was looking at Cedar Bog Lake in the Anoka Sandplain, just north of the Twin Cities. And he showed its vegetation history and its response over the years. And eventually, excuse me, the isolation of that lake from significant mineral influence by peat expansion around the basin itself. Then George came along and studied the post-mid-Holocene sweep of white pine across the state. Each of those blue dots is a bearing tree
Jim,
Yes.
sorry, can you close a
Wait,
minute the sharing because the presentation froze?
I must have. I'm
No, that sometimes happen with Zoom. That
Do I
hasn't.
need this? Well, I'm clicking through with my mouse, and I must have hit something with the mouse. Do I stop? I'll resume share. Is that
Yeah.
better?
Now it's back. Yeah, no. Sometimes it needs refreshing. It has nothing to do with you. It's all good.
I don't know if it's. I'll take the blame. So here comes the white pine across the state, and of course this happens with the general mesification of the climate after the mid-post-Holocene. So after the mid-Holocene, then Paul Glaser came along, and Paul's dissertation was dealing with macrofossil transport across tundra. But I still think what Paul is known for a lot, among many things, is a study of the massive peatlands in Minnesota and their genesis. Again, sort of a mid-Holocene thing when things became cooler and wetter across the state a little bit. Then here comes Eric, and then Eric, of course, studied the big woods. These green dots are the bearing trees that are elm across the state. They're either riparian or most of them were clustered down here in the big woods, of course. And so that was his dissertation site. Then at the end of the decade in the 80s, my brother and I tagged along. John studied the invasion by jack pine into prairie, that big patch in the southwestern area there of the jack pine distribution in the north central part of the state. And I came along and looked at water level changes in a small sand plain in western Minnesota that showed that these water level changes were not uniform across the landscape, but depended on the water table. All these things fit into the context, whether they're meant to or not, from Ed all the way to the rest of the students during those decades, about how hydroclimate was an important driver of ecological change. In dry periods, you have lots of open areas and fires can sweep across them and maintain the prairies. But in music conditions, after the mid-Holocene, streams lengthen their length, the water table rises, more near groundwater divides and less near the streams. This general mesification of the climate then went, well, wherever the water table intersects the land surface, you have wetlands, and lakes can form as well and deepen and enlarge. Then that allows some suppression of fire frequencies, general wetter conditions, allowing white pine and jack pine and big woods to come back and to colonize these sites that were formerly prairie. So life, what was life like with Eric at home in the lab in the field? This is a very early picture, the very first sampling trip Eric ever went on to the Black Hills. Here he is with his lifelong friend, James Parker. As you can see, they're standing next to a pool, or Eric thinks is a pond. He wants to core it, and he has his sampling device with him because he's always prepared in the field. This is the house that Eric lived in for much of his graduate school career on Grantham Street. It was a very nice neighborhood. Or one of the former governors of Minnesota lived next to us, and they put up with a house full of 5 graduate students. It was located just to the west of the St. Paul campus, and also Luther Seminary was there a little bit near our house as well, to the west of the house. So we always had a seminarian or two as some of our housemates throughout the years we were there. You would think that would have made the house very sedate, but in fact, seminarians are just about to receive a parish and a flock to take care of, and if they're going to sow wild oats, they need to do it before they get their seminarian degree. So some of the seminarians were some of the more actively fun participants in the house, I guess I would say. And Herb Wright lived in the neighborhood as well, and we had a number of times him coming to our house and us going to his commonly. So it was a very nice place to live during graduate school. Now in the laboratory, of course, you've seen some of these. Here's Eric and Ed's lab in 77, counting pollen, like usual. Some levels are more interesting than others. Here he is doing pollen prep in the lab. George got a picture of him then. And another image of Eric counting pollen. They kind of look alike, but this one's different. He's actually up in the big woods area, and he finally finds his favorite pollen grain, Tilia. I mean, Eric liked all pollen grains like like they were his children, but Tilia was his favorite child. Except I'm pretty sure Maria is really his favorite child. Just to be clear about that. Although, when he came to name his computer program, he didn't name it Maria, he named it Tilia, but who knows, maybe we'll have to draw our own conclusions about that. It wasn't all lab work. We did field work as well. Here we are with Paul and Herb coring Walsfeld Marsh in 1980. And Eric went back to the American West, of course, to reacquaint things. Here he is with the sail of Canada that George pointed out. And a little adventure. You've seen some of these slides before, backpacking in the Wind Rivers. I want you to note the Clint Eastwood hat that Eric's wearing. It's not just any hat, that's modeled on the good, bad, and the ugly. And many gatherings at Herb's house with old friends, colleagues over the years, very common things, and at other friends' house. This is at Nancy and Doug Smith's place, a party for Henry Lamb there. Ray Spear was there as long as Jane, before they were married. My sister-in-law's there. I'm not sure where my brother was. And you see Eric and Henry were very happy at that time. And now Eric says that this is Vaccinium angustifolium, supposedly. I'm not, it could be anything. They look pretty happy. I don't know. No. Then, of course, Eric and Jane got married. The celebration took place in the backyard of our graduate school house there. This is Doug Smith, myself, and my brother playing a little hillbilly music for them, with Eric in the background chatting to, excuse me, probably some relative, and his new father-in-law is there over his right shoulder. And 20-some years later, Jane returned the favor by playing organ at my wedding when I finally got married. So very much appreciated that. Then they moved to Cambridge for a year. You've seen this as well. You can just see Eric's just can't wait to go count pollen and write computer code. There's Eric and Jane as a handsome couple in and around Cambridge. Then the mid 80s, back to Ed's lab, and more gatherings at Herb's house. This might actually have been Eric's house. I'm not sure if I recognize that couch, but don't you wish you knew what they were talking about? What were they saying? We can only speculate what they were talking about. This is just one guess. Lots of field work in Minnesota. That's the Dakotas, that's Cottonwood Lake, that's Pikes Pond in Florida, north central Minnesota in my area. And Eric, that was just a field trip to Curtis Prairie down in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, the Limnological Research Center had an old yellow van that we called the banana van. And I got this off the internet because I didn't have a picture of the banana van. It was actually a Dodge, but it looked like this. And we spent many, many long hours talking in that van over the years. Coming back from doing field work, you'd be working in the field for 2 or 3 days in a row and then come back and then you had 6 hours in the van to get back to the Twin Cities, usually late at night. And I think that's really where we developed most of our hypotheses and really figured things out in those vans. Those were very, very productive van rides. Very fond memories of them. Okay, just a quick statement here about Eric's impact. I think of science in some ways as a big sprawling brick building or edifice built of many bricks. Excuse me. Each publication is a brick. Bricks are good things. Some bricks are not made so well, but they're made. Some are in place haphazardly, kind of piled up. They add to the pile for a while. It's a little unstable. Some of them get knocked down. So what's your impact when you think about things like this? Well, if you make bricks, your impact will be linear. Some people make a lot of bricks. Some people make fewer bricks, but it's still good. You're still adding to the entire building, to the edifice. But if you make tools to make better bricks and to make them more secure when you do put them in place, your impact will be exponential. And that's where I would argue Eric is. I think he's up there, way beyond most of us. His impact will be felt for many, many years. It already has been felt. In friendship, this really is, I think, in science. Of course, we want to learn new knowledge, but one of the things that makes science really, really satisfying are the friendships that you build along the way, of course. And there have been so many of them that Eric has generated and been key to. And they really are the wonderful things that make science great. I'm grateful for all these. Here's George and Eric. Their long and remarkable friendship has been really, really fun to see over the years and very inspirational. And, we've shared not only our careers, but we've laid out mud, we've tasted it, we have wrapped it up, we have plotted it up on diagrams. We've shared more than our lives. We've shared thousands of years together as paleoecologists, really, when you think of it that way. And who else better to share than time with than Eric? I mean, he was just a wonderful friend. So I'm very grateful for his friendship. And I really like this picture from Henry from the Jurassic Coast trip they had taken. And I guess with that, we'll toast Eric later, but cheers to Eric, and we'll